She tightened the zipper on my daughter's neck until she collapsed. Tell me again how that was an accident. The words came out before I even realized I'd raised my voice, the backstage lights flickering against the panic tightening my chest. People froze. No one stepped forward. No one corrected her. The woman in the expensive blazer simply folded her hands and told everyone to stay calm, even as my little girl's skin burned red from the pressure. And then she smiled. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't clumsiness. Someone had meant for this to happen, someone confident the truth would never touch them. Sir, lower your tone, one of the event volunteers snapped, stepping between us like I was the problem. I didn't move, I didn't shout again. I didn't even breathe too hard. There's a way a man stands when he's been trained to read danger, and right then, I stood exactly like that. Calm, coiled, unshakable. I checked Mira's pulse with hands steadier than anyone else's in the room. Her breath was shallow, her eyelashes trembling against her cheeks. She'd fainted from lack of air. Nothing complicated, nothing mysterious. And yet, the DA's wife, Celine Hargrave, delivered her excuse with rehearsed precision, claiming the zipper caught unexpectedly, as if children regularly passed out from fabric malfunctions. The paramedics arrived late, as if the call had been delayed. Cassian Hargrave, the district attorney himself, appeared moments later looking more annoyed than concerned. His eyes didn't go to my unconscious daughter. They went straight to his wife. She nodded once, a tiny gesture of assurance, and suddenly his whole expression softened, as if he'd just confirmed the world was still under his control. He clapped my shoulder lightly. "These things happen with cheap costumes," he said, already signaling the responders to wrap up quickly. I didn't answer. I just stared at Mira, my Mira, the only person left in my world. I watched the discoloration on her neck, the deep grooves in her skin, not random, not chaotic, but uniform. A forced downward drag, a deliberate constriction, the kind of detail you only catch if you've studied patterns of harm for a living. But none of them knew that. They only saw a maintenance man in a courthouse uniform. Selene floated closer, hands clasped like she was attending a funeral she caused. "She panicked," she repeated softly, rehearsed. "Some children do. They're sensitive." Sensitive. My daughter nearly lost consciousness in her hands, and she called her sensitive. The paramedic checking Mira glanced at me with a strange hesitation, like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. "Pulse is stabilized," he muttered. "She'll come around." His partner, however, looked directly at me and quietly whispered, "This didn't slip. You know that, don't you?" I held his gaze for a beat too long. Then he straightened, and the DA's presence silenced him. They moved Mira to the triage area, and I followed, every step feeling like the floor was tilting under me. Cassian stayed behind with his staff, his expression already morphing into political neutrality as he thanked volunteers for handling it so responsibly. Celine remained at his side, immaculate, composed, untouched by what she'd done. I sat beside Mira, brushing her hair away from her face as she slowly regained consciousness. When her eyes blinked open, she reached for my hand, weakly, instinctively. That little gesture cracked something inside me. She didn't remember passing out. She didn't remember who had tightened the zipper, but when I asked her quietly if someone helped her in the fitting room, she hesitated and whispered, "She told me to stand still. Stand still. Not hold still. Not careful. Stand still." The difference mattered. A volunteer approached with a clipboard, trying to get me to sign a statement that framed the entire incident as a wardrobe malfunction. I refused. The volunteer insisted. I still didn't sign. And when the DA himself came to pressure me, smiling too wide, voice too soft, telling me it would be better for everyone if we kept this simple, I only nodded politely, while my mind cataloged everything, every angle, every phrase, every lie. Because underneath the quiet exterior, underneath the work uniform, underneath the calm, I was already reconstructing the truth. Old instincts I'd buried years ago were waking up. The instincts of a forensic analyst who once spent his life proving intentional harm, no matter how hard someone tried to hide it. I didn't want that part of myself back. But tonight, I didn't get a choice. I stood, lifted Mira gently into my arms, and walked out of that auditorium without another word. Let them believe they'd scared me into silence. Let them mistake my calm for defeat. They had no idea what they had just awakened. I carried Mira out of the auditorium, her head resting against my shoulder, her breath still shallow but steady now. The hallway outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that shouldn't exist after a child nearly passed out. But this building had a talent for swallowing anything inconvenient. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already felt Celine's gaze lingering behind me, like a fingerprint pressed against my spine. And I felt the DA's attention shift as soon as he realized I wasn't making a scene. Men like him feared silence more than shouting. The cool air of the lobby hit us, and Mira stirred weakly. "Dad, my throat hurts," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and that single sound was enough to anchor every emotion I was fighting to control. "I know," I said softly. "We're going home." Outside, the parking lot lights buzzed overhead. A few parents passing by offered half-hearted concerned looks, but none stopped to ask what happened. They had already heard the official version. Before opening the car door, I checked her neck again. The marks were still deep, too patterned, too defined. Not a random scrape, not a slip. The kind of imprint left by intentional downward pressure, calculated, deliberate. That image stayed with me as I buckled her in and closed the door. As I walked around the car, a voice called out from behind. "Hey, wait." It was one of the paramedics, the same one who'd whispered earlier that the zipper didn't slip. He jogged toward me, glancing around as if afraid someone might see him stop. "Look, I can't get involved. You know how it is here." He lowered his voice. "But I just want you to know, nothing about that girl's injuries looked like a fall or panic response. The marks were too clean, too guided." I didn't react, I simply nodded once. He understood that was all I needed. He stepped back quickly, already retreating into the building before he was noticed. Mira watched him through the window, her eyes half open, confused. I got into the driver's seat, turned on the engine, and pulled out of the lot. My hands never shook. Not once. The drive home was quiet. Streetlights flashed rhythmically across the windshield, painting Mira's face in alternating bands of shadow and gold. She leaned against the seat, exhausted. I kept one eye on the road and one eye on the pattern of those red marks in my mind. Geometry, angle, pressure direction. All of it was beginning to map itself out without permission, like muscle memory reclaiming space. "Dad, did I do something wrong?" Her voice was barely there. That was the moment something inside me crystallized. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong." I glanced at her. "Someone else did." She seemed too tired to understand, so she closed her eyes again and held the small stuffed fox she always kept in my car, a faded, worn little toy she'd had since preschool. Her fingers curled around it like she was afraid it would disappear. That fox had survived every move, every bad day, every moment she needed comfort, and now, watching her clutch it with a bruised neck, it suddenly became the most important object in our world. When we reached the apartment, I carried her inside. The living room was dim, illuminated only by the lamp I'd left on earlier. I laid Mira gently on the couch, covered her with a blanket, and placed the fox beside her. She drifted off almost instantly. Only then did the silence truly hit me. I stood there in the center of the room, breathing slowly, letting the night settle around me. My tools still sat on the coffee table from earlier repairs I'd been doing. Small screwdrivers, pliers, measuring tape, familiar things, normal things. But tonight the room felt different, heavier, because for the first time in years, I felt the old training pushing its way back into the space between my thoughts. Pattern reconstruction, behavioral sequencing, intent deduction. I tried to push it away. I couldn't. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a cold bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. My reflection in the dark window stared back, not the courthouse maintenance guy everyone saw, but the other version of me, the one I'd buried for Mira's sake, the one who once spent nights in tents lit by nothing but headlamps, analyzing footprints, fiber angles, heat signatures, interviewing terrified witnesses, piecing together what accidents really were. I had promised myself I was done with all that. But some promises can't survive a moment like tonight. As I stood there, replaying everything, I heard a quiet buzz from my phone, a message from an unknown number. "You saw more than you should have tonight. Let it go." No signature, no need for one. The timing told me exactly who was behind it. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I didn't need intimidation documented. I needed evidence documented. That was when I opened the voice memo app and recorded every detail I remembered, every tiny thing. Celine's hand position, the angle Mira leaned, the pressure lines, the distance between the costume racks. Every data point, every hint. While speaking quietly into the phone, I realized something with absolute clarity. They assumed I was harmless. They assumed I was just a tired single dad with no time, no resources, no background, and assumptions like that are fatal. By the time I finished recording, the room felt colder, sharper. I walked back to the living room and sat beside Mira, brushing her hair gently away from the bruises forming on her neck. "Sleep," I whispered to her. "I'll handle the rest." And for the first time since the auditorium, I felt fully awake. I stayed by Mira's side long after she fell into a deep, uneasy sleep. The dim lamp in the living room cast a soft, amber glow across her face, highlighting the faint, angry marks around her neck. Each breath she drew felt like a reminder of how close she'd come to something far worse. I adjusted her blanket gently, making sure the stuffed fox rested against her chest. She clung to it, even in sleep. I watched her for another minute before standing quietly. My body felt wired, too alert, too focused. Sleep wasn't an option, not tonight. Not while that image of Celine's controlled smile was burned into the back of my mind. I moved to the small kitchen table, where I'd laid the phone after recording everything I remembered. I replayed parts of the voice memo silently, not for the information, I knew the details by heart, but to let my thoughts settle into their old rhythm. There was a cadence I used to fall into during investigations, a way of sectioning information until it stopped being emotional and started becoming structural. That rhythm was returning, but recording memories wasn't enough. I needed to see the scene again, the real scene, the physical one. I checked the time, nearly midnight. The courthouse would be locked up except for security and overnight cleaning staff. It didn't matter. I had keys for most of the wings due to my maintenance role, and the auditorium was closed for the week after the event. No one would question repairs. I grabbed my jacket quietly, double-checked Mira was still asleep, and slipped out the door. The drive to the courthouse felt shorter than usual. My hands stayed at 10 and 2, the streetlights passing steadily. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicked. Everything inside me felt unnervingly calm, an old, familiar kind of calm. It was the same quiet focus I used to have before entering a scene with bodies still cooling. When I reached the building, only the security booth lights were on. The guard on duty, an older man named Harold, looked up from his newspaper. "Late night?" he asked, raising a brow. "Spotlight jammed again," I lied easily. "Figure it's better to fix it before tomorrow." Harold grunted. "Those things never stay fixed." He handed me the clipboard to sign in. I scribbled my name, nodded, and headed inside. The hallway leading to the auditorium felt colder at night. The overhead lights dimmed to low power mode. My footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor as I approached the double doors. I unlocked them, slipped inside, and closed the doors behind me. Silence swallowed the room. The stage lights glowed faintly. Emergency bulbs casting weak illumination across the costume racks still pushed against the wall. Everything was exactly as it had been hours earlier, except for the absence of people and the weight of truth pressing into every corner. I walked slowly across the stage, my eyes scanning everything. I didn't touch anything, not yet. First, I had to see the space as it was left, without interference. The fitting area sat to the right of the stage, curtains half drawn. I stepped behind them, the faint smell of fabric and hairspray lingering in the enclosed space. The costume Mira had worn was still draped over a chair, the zipper glinting under the low light. I crouched beside it, careful not to disturb anything, and studied the zipper tab. It was bent. Not badly, but bent in a way that told a story. Natural bends from fabric tension happened upward, toward escape. This one bent downward, forced from a higher angle. My jaw tightened. Next, I examined the carpet beneath the chair. Two short, shallow scratch marks cut into the fibers run parallel to each other. A child's heels dragging during resistance. I leaned closer. The depth was consistent with someone about Mira's size trying to counterbalance forward pressure. I didn't need to guess who had applied that pressure. Standing, I replayed Mira's soft words. She told me to stand still. Stand still while being lifted. Stand still while a zipper was being pulled tight, enough to restrict air. I scanned the curtains next. One section was pulled tighter than the rest, likely where Selene had held them to block view. A faint imprint, almost unnoticeable, marked the fabric, likely from her rings pressing against it. Piece by piece, everything was aligning. I took photos with my phone, but not obsessively, just enough to preserve angles, distances, and placement. I didn't want to disturb anything yet. I wanted the data clean. As I prepared to leave, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Instinct kicked in before fear had the chance. I turned slowly, keeping my breath steady. A shadow moved along the wall. Then, Elira stepped into the dim light, still wearing her work clothes, her hair tied back loosely. She looked startled when she realized it was me. "You're here," she whispered. "You're here," I replied, not lowering my guard. I couldn't sleep. She glanced around nervously. "I needed to see something. Needed to confirm I wasn't imagining the look on Selene's face when she brought your daughter out." So she had noticed. She had seen more than she admitted earlier. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "Neither should you." But neither of us left. She approached the costume chair slowly. I saw her walk Mira behind the curtains. I thought she just wanted to help. But when she came out without her, I felt something was wrong. Her voice shook slightly, not from fear of me, but from fear of the truth she was acknowledging. "You're not imagining anything," I said. She swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd come back tonight." I had to. She looked at me then, really looked, her gaze shifting with wary realization. "You're not just a maintenance tech, are you?" I didn't answer. She didn't push. Instead, she whispered, "Then I think you're the only person who can expose them." Her words landed like a weight, clicking neatly into place. I took one last glance at the scene before turning toward the exit. "This is just the beginning," I said quietly. "The truth always leaves patterns." And now I knew exactly where to find them. Elira and I stepped out of the auditorium, closing the door quietly behind us. The corridor stretched ahead, long, dim, and hollow sounding at this hour. She walked a few steps before stopping, turning toward me with that same uneasy look she'd shown earlier. "If you're going after them," she whispered, "you need more than scratches on a carpet." I didn't respond immediately. She wasn't wrong. Selene and Cassian Hargrave didn't survive in this courthouse because they were clever. They survived because they controlled narrative. They shaped it, tightened it, smoothed it until even blatant harm looked like polished coincidence. "What exactly did you notice?" I finally asked. Elira hesitated, then drew closer. When Selene called out for help, her voice didn't match her face. She rubbed her arm as if trying to warm herself. Her expression wasn't frantic, not even concerned. It was composed, too composed, like she'd prepared the reaction before the moment happened. That tracked perfectly with everything I had reconstructed. She hadn't panicked because nothing unexpected had happened. Everything had unfolded exactly as she intended. And, Elira continued, when Cassian ordered the officers to classify it as a non-critical incident, he didn't even wait to hear their assessment. She bit her lip, conflicted. He does that sometimes, when he wants something buried. Her words weren't an accusation, just truth she'd been too afraid to admit until now. I studied her carefully. "You realize if you keep talking," I said, "you're putting a target on your own back." She laughed softly, but it wasn't humor. I already put it there when I started noticing things he didn't want noticed. Then she added, "I became a prosecutor to fight for people who didn't have power, not to shield the ones who abuse it." There it was. The bridge I needed. Someone inside the system who wasn't drowned by it. "We're going to need an affidavit," I said. "Something concrete about Selene isolating Mira." Her eyes widened. "You think the judge will actually read it?" "With the right evidence attached," I replied. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll write it. Tonight." We left the corridor and headed toward the lobby exit. At the security gate, Harold glanced up from his desk. "Late night for both of you?" he said with a suspicious look. Not in a hostile way, more like curiosity sharpened by years of watching people lie. Work backlog, Elira replied smoothly, flashing her badge. Harold grumbled and let us pass. Once outside, the cold air hit with a crisp bite, clearing my thoughts even further. I walked her to her car mostly out of instinct. Not chivalry, protective reflex. This case was already dangerous, even if she didn't see all the layers yet. Before getting into her car, she touched the roof lightly, a nervous habit. "You won't stop now, will you?" "No," I said. "I can't." She nodded once and drove off. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, letting the silence settle before heading to my own car. The instant I unlocked the door, my phone buzzed. Another message. Different number this time. "You shouldn't be poking around after hours. People might misunderstand your intentions." That wasn't intimidation, it was surveillance. Someone had eyes inside the building, watching movements that should have gone unnoticed. Cassian was cleaning up loose ends already. Good. It meant he was nervous. I deleted the message again, but this time forwarded the number to a separate folder I kept for documentation. Every threat, every warning, every detail, they would all matter later, especially when he tried to claim innocence. When I got home, the apartment felt too quiet. Mira was still asleep on the couch, her breathing steadier now. The fox was tucked under her arm. I sat beside her, exhaustion tugging at my muscles, but sleep stayed distant. Instead, I replayed the hallway conversation with Elira over and over. An affidavit, witness testimony, reconstruction photos, threat messages, physical evidence. Piece by piece, the case was forming. Not emotionally, not as a father's outrage, but as a dossier. A clean, methodical structure the Hargraves wouldn't see coming. I rose quietly, grabbed my laptop from the bedroom, and opened a blank document. I began typing out the sequence of events. Timestamps, environmental observations, my notes on the scratch marks, the bent zipper tab, Selene's physical positioning. I kept the language clinical, no speculation, just data. Every sentence had to matter. Every detail had to survive scrutiny. My fingers paused several times, not because I doubted anything, but because certain memories cut too close. The moment Mira's body went limp, the delayed panic in Selene's expression, Cassian's patronizing reassurance. Each memory sharpened the next line of text. Hours slipped by without notice. By the time I finished, the clock read nearly 3 in the morning. I sat back, scanning everything. It wasn't enough yet to break them, but it was enough to force the first crack. And cracks were all I needed. I saved the document in 3 separate encrypted backups, one on the laptop, one on a drive, one in the cloud under a different alias. Old habits resurfacing effortlessly. When I returned to the living room, Mira stirred slightly and murmured something incoherent. I knelt beside her. The sight of her bruised neck reignited that cold fire inside me, controlled, deliberate, unyielding. I whispered, "They think no one will stand against them. They think I don't matter." My hand brushed her hair gently. But they forgot something important. She didn't wake, but her fingers curled around the fox again, as if she heard everything in a dream. "They harmed the wrong child," I breathed, "and they underestimated the wrong man." In the stillness of the room, that promise felt like the first step toward everything that would come next. I stayed beside Mira until the first hint of dawn crept through the blinds, a thin blue line cutting across the living room floor. She slept deeply now, her small body curled around the fox, the bruising on her neck darker but less swollen. I brushed a hand across her hair one last time before standing. Today couldn't wait. Not anymore. I moved quietly to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and reviewed everything I'd documented last night. The photos, the notes, the forensic breakdown. Each line read clean, controlled, unemotional. It needed to stay that way. Emotion made evidence vulnerable. Precision made it undeniable. By 6 a.m., Mira stirred awake. I closed the laptop before she could see the images. She didn't need to be reminded. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, crouching beside her. She blinked at me, still groggy. "Does your throat still hurt?" She lifted her hand to her neck and nodded slightly, not frightened, just tired. Too tired for a child who'd spent the previous night fighting for breath. I helped her sit up, gave her water, and watched her sip slowly. "I need to go to work for a few hours," I told her gently. I'll take you to Mrs. Alden downstairs. You like staying with her, remember? She nodded again. Will she read to me? I'm sure she will. I dressed her warmly, careful not to let anything brush too hard against her neck. As I walked her downstairs, she clutched my sleeve, holding on tightly. That tiny grip hardened everything inside me. Once she was settled with Mrs. Alden, who immediately looked horrified at her bruises, I promised I'd check on her soon and headed to the courthouse. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sun hovered low, casting long shadows across the entrance. I walked inside with my badge clipped in place, nodding to Harold at the security booth. He eyed me longer than usual, almost studying me. Rough night? He asked. Something like that. He didn't pry further, though I sensed he wanted to. The courthouse buzzed with its usual morning urgency. Heels clicking, papers rustling, voices murmuring. No one looked at me twice. Maintenance techs were invisible here by design. Silent ghosts in blue uniforms. That invisibility would become my greatest asset today. I went straight to the evidence I needed to re-examine. The auditorium, the fitting area, the physical markers. But first, there was another detail I wanted to check. One nobody had considered. The hallway camera. I knew its placement well. It angled downward from the corridor ceiling, capturing anyone who walked behind the curtains area. But because of the glare from the overhead lights, the footage wasn't perfect. Still, it covered the approach toward the fittings. I didn't have clearance to access the footage directly, but I didn't need to. I knew who did. I found Davis, the building's overnight custodial lead, wiping down a bench near the elevators. He was a middle-aged guy with a permanent coffee stain on his vest and a tendency to gossip about everyone, except the people he feared. "Morning," he grunted when he saw me. "Morning," I replied. "I need the hall camera timestamp from last night, around 8:30. He frowned. "Why?" "Something went wrong during the kids' event. I'm just trying to confirm it wasn't caused by a lighting failure." Davis shrugged. "Fine, I'll pull it up from the booth." He didn't suspect anything else. That was good. We walked back to the security office. Harold wasn't there. His shift had ended. Davis sat down at the console, logged in, and pulled up the time I requested. The grainy footage flickered to life, and there she was, Selene Hargrave, leading Mira behind the curtain, graceful, composed, looking like she was escorting a child to a photo session. But the frame freeze showed something else, the angle of her hand gripping Mira's shoulder. Too firm, too intentional. A detail invisible to casual eyes, but unmistakable to mine. "See," Davis said. "Nothing wrong with the lights." "Looks good," I replied evenly. "Thanks." He logged out, and I left quickly before he asked more questions. Now I had another piece. Movement pattern, force alignment, escort behavior. Everything in that clip matched the reconstruction I'd done in my apartment. I walked toward the auditorium once more, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Morning light filtered across the empty seats. I approached the fitting corner again, the costume still draped over the chair. My notes from last night came alive in my mind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small evidence envelope. Inside it, the damaged zipper tab. I had taken it earlier with gloved hands. Normally, chain of custody required formal submission, but this wasn't a police process yet. It was personal investigation. I placed the tab on the table and photographed it from multiple angles under different lighting, documenting the bend direction. Next, I measured the distance between the scratch marks and the curtain gap, mapping Mira's likely foot placement before she collapsed. Every movement Selene made was aligning into a deliberate sequence. But I needed one final confirmation: the pattern of force. I took a piece of spare fabric from the costume rack, same material, same zipper model, and recreated the pull angles. Upward slips produced a diagonal tear. Mira's tab bent downward, sharply. Only someone taller could create that angle. Someone like Selene. When I finished, a soft sound echoed from the doorway. I turned. It was Alira again. She stood with a folder clutched to her chest. "I typed the affidavit," she said quietly. "Signed it too." She approached slowly and handed it to me. Inside was her written testimony, detailed, brave, solid. A sworn statement that Selene isolated Mira deliberately. "You're sure?" I asked. "Yes." Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. I nodded. "Then the motion starts today." Her eyes widened slightly at the conviction in my tone, and in that moment, something shifted. The first formal crack in the Hargraves' control was now real, documented, and ready to move. It was time to turn evidence into consequences. I held Elira's affidavit for a long moment, the weight of it settling into my hands more heavily than the paper should allow. Her signature ink was still fresh, the edges crisp, the testimony detailed enough to shake the foundation of anyone protected by power. She watched me carefully, uncertain, maybe even afraid of what came next. "This isn't reversible," I said quietly. "I know." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "But neither is what she did." That was enough. I slid the affidavit into the evidence folder I'd assembled, each piece placed with clinical precision. When I met her gaze again, she straightened, as if my silent acknowledgement reassured her that she had chosen the right side of this fight. "We'll file the motion," I said, "today." She let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. "I'll walk you to the clerk's office." We left the auditorium together, our footsteps echoing across the empty space. Outside, the courthouse had fully awakened, attorneys rushing with files in their arms, clerks carrying stacks of motions, the distant hum of printers choking through their morning load. To everyone else, it was just another day. But for me, every step felt like shifting tectonic plates beneath the floor. We headed upstairs to the clerk's office. The hallway was bright, sunlit through high windows. Elira walked beside me, her pace brisk, but her hands trembling slightly. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear. And someone did. Two figures rounded the corner, Cassian Hargrave and his senior investigator, Randall Mox. Cassian stopped instantly when he saw us. Mox's expression hardened, protective, like a guard dog waiting for a command. Cassian's smile was smooth, practiced, too polished to be human. "Well," he drawled, "this is interesting. Early morning stroll with one of my prosecutors, Rowan." I said nothing, locking the evidence folder tightly under my arm. Elira swallowed hard. "Sir, we were just—" Cassian cut her off with a raised hand. "I wasn't addressing you?" His gaze fixed on me now, sharp, calculating, predatory. "You're interfering in something that's already been resolved," he said quietly, stepping closer. "My wife has suffered enough humiliation over an accident." "Your wife nearly strangled a child," I replied evenly. "That's not an accident." The corridor froze. Mox stiffened like he expected violence. Elira took a tiny step back, though she stayed close enough to show solidarity. Cassian's smile faltered for half a second, just long enough to confirm he didn't like being spoken to as an equal. "You're a maintenance tech," he said softly, almost pitying. "You clean floors, fix lights, you don't make accusations, and you certainly don't initiate filings." My jaw tightened. Not because of the insult, I'd endured far worse from men like him, but because he was slipping. He was revealing how threatened he felt. "You think intimidation will work?" I asked. "I know it will." His expression sharpened. "Walk away before you drown in waters you don't understand." Elira stepped forward, surprising both of us. "Sir," she said firmly, "you should step back. Now." Cassian turned his attention to her, eyes narrowing. "Are you siding with him?" "I'm doing my job." Her voice didn't waver this time. The DA's jaw clenched. "We'll discuss that later." He pivoted on his heels and walked off, Mox trailing behind him. But before turning the corner, Cassian glanced back at me and mouthed a silent warning. I didn't blink. Once they disappeared, Elira exhaled shakily. "He's scared," she murmured. "Good," I replied. "Fear exposes mistakes." We entered the clerk's office. The clerk on duty, a woman named Joreen, who never cared about courthouse politics, looked up from her computer. "Filing?" "Yes," Elira said, handing over the documents before I could. "Motion for evidentiary review, with supporting affidavit and exhibits." Joreen skimmed the cover sheet, eyebrows lifting slightly at the defendants' names. But she stamped it, logged it, and slid the receipt back to us without comment. "It'll be assigned within the hour," she said casually, as if she hadn't just created the first legal crack in the DA's armor. Outside the office, Elira leaned against the wall, adrenaline still coursing. "I can't believe I just did that." "I can," I said. She looked at me, almost confused. "How?" "Because you care more about justice than consequences." Her breath hitched faintly. I'm not as brave as you think. You signed the affidavit, I reminded her. That's braver than most people here. She nodded, absorbing the words like someone unused to being seen clearly. What now? She asked. Now, I said, they try to silence us. Almost on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. We warned you. Last chance to walk away. I showed the message to Elira. Her eyes widened. That's direct. Direct means desperate, I replied. But desperation was dangerous, especially from people like the Hargraves. Elira's expression shifted from fear to resolve. I'll keep monitoring the docket. When the judge assigns the motion, you'll know immediately. Thank you, I said. She gave a small, brave nod and walked away, disappearing into the stream of attorneys heading toward their courtrooms. I stood in the hallway alone now, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I looked down at my phone again, rereading the threat. They thought threats would break me, but threats only told me I was finally hitting the right nerves. Slowly, deliberately, I typed a single message back. I'm not walking anywhere. Then I slipped my phone into my pocket, turned toward the lobby, and walked straight into the storm they thought I'd run from. I walked through the courthouse lobby with steady steps, the echo of my reply still settling in my pocket like a loaded round. I wasn't walking away. Not from the threats, not from the pressure, and definitely not from the truth. People rushed past me in every direction, none realizing that the building's most carefully protected secret had just been pried open. The Hargraves might have controlled the narrative yesterday, but today the cracks had started to show. My phone buzzed again. Not a message this time, but a calendar alert. The reminder I'd set hours earlier, check docket assignment. I slipped into a quieter corner near the vending machines and pulled it up. There it was. Judge Helena Marrow, assigned to the motion. She wasn't easily swayed, not by politics, not by the DA, not by anyone. Her reputation was the reason Cassian had tried to bury the incident before it ever reached a courtroom. Now, with her name attached, things were officially out of his hands. I left the courthouse and stepped into the sharp morning air. My breath fogged slightly, but inside, a colder determination had settled. I headed straight to Mrs. Alden's apartment to pick up Mira. The moment she opened the door, she gave me a relieved smile. She had a quiet morning, she said softly. But she's not as talkative as usual. Mira peeked from behind her, gripping the fox again. Her eyes lit up slightly when she saw me, and she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around my waist. Careful not to touch her neck, I held her close. I could feel her fear, even in silence. Let's go home, I whispered. Back in the apartment, I warmed soup for her, while she sat at the table drawing absent-mindedly. Crayons tapped softly against the paper as she sketched a small fox under a curtain. My chest tightened. Even children leave evidence, small, fragile pieces of truth. While she ate, I opened my laptop again, checking the motion status. Accepted. A hearing scheduled for 3 days from now. This was moving faster than I expected. Good. I emailed the finalized evidence packet to a secure drive, then backed it up 3 more times. If Cassian planned to interfere, he wouldn't be able to erase anything. After lunch, I tucked Mira into bed for a nap. Her energy drained too quickly, her breathing still slightly strained. As soon as her eyes closed, I grabbed the evidence envelope and returned to the courthouse. This time, I didn't head to the auditorium. I didn't go to the clerk's office. Instead, I made my way to the judicial wing, specifically to Judge Marrow's chambers. Protocol didn't allow anyone to walk in without appointment, but I wasn't here to see her directly. I needed her clerk. The clerk decided what reached the judge fastest. Her name was Lisa Hart, a woman whose sharp mind was matched only by her intolerance for nonsense. She looked up as I approached, her glasses sliding slightly down her nose. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here about the motion filed this morning. I want to ensure the supplemental exhibits are included in the judge's packet." She studied me for a long moment. "You're maintenance staff, correct?" "Yes." Her brow furrowed. "And you filed a motion for evidentiary review?" "Correct." Another beat. "Why?" I opened the folder just enough for her to see the bruising. Photographs, not everything, just enough to shift the air around us. She inhaled sharply, understanding without needing explanation. "I'll make sure she sees this first," she said quietly. "Thank you." When I left her office, I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I walked down the west stairwell toward the service corridor. Something in the back of my mind kept tugging, a detail I hadn't checked yet. The costume rack, the one used for fittings before Mira's turn. Back in the auditorium, I examined each costume one by one. Most were untouched, but one, the one on the far left rack, had faint powder residue near the collar, foundation, makeup. Something Selene might have transferred. More importantly, the zipper on that costume wasn't bent or resisted. It moved smoothly. Mira's costume wasn't defective. It was targeted. As I photographed this new detail, the auditorium door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn immediately. "I thought I might find you here," a familiar voice said. It was Mox, Cassian's investigator. He stepped closer, his heavy boots echoing. His posture carried the weight of someone who believed he could intimidate by presence alone. "You're digging too deep," he said flatly. I checked the last photo, then finally looked up. "Doing my job." "That's not your job," he snapped. "Your job is to replace light bulbs. Sometimes the light shows things people don't want to see." His jaw clenched. "You're making a dangerous mistake." I slipped my phone into my pocket. "I've made worse." He stepped forward again. "Drop this before you get burned." There was no point arguing. Men like Mox understood only one language, the kind spoken by refusal. "You should tell your boss," I said quietly, "that threats don't stop a father." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his expression. I walked past him, leaving the auditorium without a backward glance. When I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was Elira. Judge Marrow acknowledged the motion. "She's requested all supplemental evidence ASAP. She's taking this seriously." A slow, controlled breath escaped me. Good, because the Hargraves were about to learn what happens when truth hits daylight. And I was done playing quietly in the dark. Elira's message lit up the screen like a quiet spark in the dark. A signal that Judge Marrow wasn't just reading the motion, she was already moving. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, letting the wind cut across my face, letting the weight of the shift settle in. This wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't imagination or paranoia. The judiciary itself had stepped in. And once Judge Marrow took interest in something, she didn't let go. I texted Elira back. "On my way to compile the full packet. Don't let anyone intercept you." Her reply came fast. "Already moved offices? I'm in a temporary room until Monday. They won't find me." Smart. Cassian was likely tearing through his wing by now, looking for points of leverage, trying to sense where the threat was coming from. But the truth about people like him was simple. They never suspected the person they looked down on. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat inside without turning on the ignition. I opened the secure folder on my phone, rechecking the photos I'd taken, the scratch marks, the bent zipper, the makeup residue, the footage screenshots. Everything aligned in a clean, irrefutable pattern. But I needed one final piece, a timeline reconstruction that no judge could dismiss. I breathed in slowly, then exhaled. 3 days until the hearing. That was barely enough time, but pressure never scared me. It sharpened me. I started the car. Instead of driving to my apartment, I took a left turn toward the city center. There was one person I needed to meet, a retired forensic technician named Kellen Hart, a man I'd trained years ago before leaving my former life behind. He ran a small repair shop now, hidden behind a row of old warehouses. His shop door chimed when I entered, and Kellen looked up from a broken radio with surprise. "Rowan, is that really you?" "Yeah," I said. "I need help." He studied me for a moment, then nodded as if he'd expected this someday. I figured the past would catch up. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time. I told him everything. Selene, Mira, the zipper, the scratches, the threats, the DA's interference. Kellen's expression grew darker with every detail. When I finished, he crossed his arms. "You have evidence pointing to deliberate harm, enough to raise criminal suspicion, but you need a full event progression." "I know," I said. "Can you assist?" His reply was immediate. "I'll draft the modeling charts for you. And Rowan, the DA's going to come after you harder now." "That's fine," Kellen gestured to a chair. "Sit, I'll get you what you need." While he began his work, I updated the digital folder, adding images and notes. My phone vibrated again. A call this time. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play. Cassian's voice poured through the speaker, low and venomous. I know what you're doing, and I know who's helping you. Back off before you destroy more than your own life. I deleted the voicemail without hesitation and forwarded the number to my documentation folder. Another threat to be presented later. Kellen returned after 20 minutes with several printed diagrams and a USB drive. He laid them on the table carefully. Angle of force, he said, tapping the first chart. Based on the bruising pattern, the downward pull required someone at least a foot taller than Mira. Your daughter couldn't have done this to herself, and no accidental snag would cause this type of bend. He tapped the second chart. Timeline approximations. Combined with your witness affidavit, this is damning. I placed the papers into my folder. Thank you. Kellen grabbed my shoulder. Be careful, Rowan. This is a powerful family you're taking on. I know, I said, but they picked the wrong child. I left the shop, got into my car, and drove straight home. Mira was awake when I entered the apartment, sitting on the couch with her fox beside her. She brightened when she saw me, and for a moment, the storm outside didn't matter. How's your throat? I asked. Still hurts a little, she murmured. But better. I sat beside her. Good. We'll fix everything. Promise? Her voice was small, crushed by the weight of something she didn't understand. I promise. After dinner, once she was asleep again, I opened the evidence folder on my laptop. Pages upon pages of documentation stared back at me, everything from the bent zipper analysis to the camera stills. I organized the final pieces, Kellen's charts, the makeup residue photos, the affidavit. When the packet was complete, I encrypted it and prepared the submission for Judge Marrow's office. My finger hovered over the send button. This moment felt heavier than any battlefield decision I'd ever made, not because of danger, but because of direction. Once this packet was filed, the Hargraves could no longer contain the truth. They would panic. They would strike. But their power didn't scare me anymore. I hit send. The submission confirmation appeared instantly. A sudden buzzing noise startled me. A notification from Elira. Just saw the preliminary charts. These are strong enough to trigger judicial review. Brace yourself, I replied. Thanks. Stay safe. As I set down the phone, I looked toward Mira's bedroom door. Everything I was doing, every risk, every hour spent digging through the truth, it was all for her. Before turning out the lights, I whispered into the dim apartment, "This ends soon." And I meant it. By the way, if you're following this closely, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next part. The apartment felt unnervingly still after I sent the final evidence packet. A quiet that wasn't peace, just the calm before everything hit. I checked on Mira one more time. She slept curled beneath her blanket, the fox tucked under her chin, breathing evenly. Seeing her like that strengthened something inside me. Whatever storm the Hargraves unleashed next, she would never face it alone. Morning came fast, too fast. I barely slept, but my mind stayed sharp. I dressed quietly, packed the folder with physical copies of evidence, and stood at the doorway, listening to the distant hum of early traffic outside. Today would be loud. Today would drag shadows into light. I left Mira with Mrs. Alden again, promising I'd be back by lunch. As I walked out of the apartment building, I checked my phone. No new messages, no threats. That silence never meant safety, it meant preparation. Cassian was regrouping. When I reached the courthouse, the atmosphere had changed. People moved faster. Whispers lingered in corners. Attorneys with rigid spines avoided eye contact. The clerk's office door was closed, blinds drawn, not the usual open window of paperwork exchanges. Something was happening. I made my way through the lobby. The hearing wasn't today, but word must have spread that Judge Marrow had accepted a packet that's implicated the DA's wife in deliberate harm against a child. Power structures trembled when the wrong secrets reached the right eyes. As I turned the corner toward the judicial wing, I stopped. Cassian Hargrave stood near Judge Marrow's chambers, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. His suit was immaculate. His expression wasn't. The irritation around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw, he was losing control. He pushed off the wall and approached me slowly, as if he owned the air between us. "You're persistent," he said quietly. "So are facts," I replied. He smiled without warmth. "You think sending your little packet changes anything?" You're playing a game you don't understand. I'm not playing, I said. I'm presenting truth. Cassian stepped closer, lowering his voice. Truth is what people believe, and no one believes a janitor over a district attorney. Maintenance tech, I corrected. And truth doesn't need belief. It just needs exposure. Something flickered in his eyes, anger mixed with a hint of something else. Unease. Before he could speak again, the door to Judge Marrow's chambers opened. Lysa, the clerk, stepped out with a stack of folders. She paused when she saw the two of us, her gaze sharpening. Then she motioned to me. Your submission has been reviewed, she said. The judge has scheduled a preliminary review meeting this afternoon. Cassian stiffened. That's highly irregular. Judge Marrow determines her own schedule, Lisa replied coolly, and she determined this cannot wait. Cassian attempted a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. May I ask what prompted such urgency? Lisa didn't blink. The content. Cassian's face hardened. She turned back to me. Be prepared to attend. I will, I said, and bring your physical exhibits. I have them. She nodded once and returned inside. Cassian waited until the door shut before leaning in. You're making enemies you can't afford, he murmured. I kept my voice steady. No, I'm holding enemies accountable. His composure cracked, barely, but enough for me to see the fracture. I left him there and walked toward the stairwell. As I descended, the echo of my footsteps mixed with distant conversations from lawyers who didn't know enough to whisper yet. The courthouse was shifting. People felt it. When I reached the lower level, the air changed again. Mox was waiting, leaning against a vending machine like he'd been posted there deliberately. He didn't speak at first, just watched me approach with a look that tried to read every thought behind my expression. Your packet made noise, he finally said. That was the intention. You know what happens when things get loud, right? People start listening. No, he said, stepping forward. People start panicking. I stopped walking. Are you here to threaten me again? Threats are messy, he replied. I'm here to give you advice. I raised an eyebrow. Advice? That man upstairs? He jerked his chin toward the judicial wing. He doesn't lose, and when he feels cornered, he burns whatever cornered him. I've been burned before, I said. I'm still standing. Mock studied me, expression unreadable for a moment. Then he exhaled. You're walking into a war you can't win alone. I shook my head. I'm not alone. He looked confused, but I didn't clarify. Illyra, Judge Marrow, Kellen, the paramedic, the evidence itself. Truth builds allies. Mock stepped aside, letting me pass. He didn't try to stop me again. I headed to the cafeteria to wait for the afternoon meeting. I sat by a window, opened my folder, and reviewed every page again. Precision sharpened everything. This was no longer just a packet. It was a blade. Around noon, Illyra approached my table quietly. They moved up the review time, she whispered. 1 hour. I closed the folder. Then it's time. She looked torn between fear and admiration. You're really not scared, are you? I stood. Fear wastes time. Together we walked toward the judicial wing again, step by step, evidence in hand. Cassian wanted silence. He was about to get the opposite. And today, for the first time, the courthouse would learn exactly who I used to be, and why I never lost a case. We reached the judicial wing with 20 minutes to spare. The hallway outside Judge Marrow's chambers was unusually quiet, too quiet. No clerks rushing, no attorneys pacing, no secretaries sorting paperwork. The air felt held, like the building itself was waiting for something to shift. Illyra walked beside me with her shoulders squared, but her fingers clenched tightly around her tablet. When we approached the door, Lysa stepped out, expression flat, but eyes sharper than before. The judge is ready, she said, stepping aside so we could enter. Inside, Judge Helena Marrow sat behind her desk, glasses perched low, reviewing a spread of documents that I recognized instantly. The photos, the diagrams, the angle charts. Seeing them in her hands rather than on my laptop made the situation feel more concrete, more irreversible. Cassian Hargrave was already in the room. He stood near the far wall, posture stiff, jaw locked. He didn't look at me directly, but the tension radiating off him was unmistakable. The judge gestured for me to step forward. Mr. Veller, she said, I've reviewed your submission. Before we continue, I need to confirm. Everything here was collected by you? Yes, Your Honor, I replied. And you stand by each observation as accurate to the event? I do. Cassian let out a short breath, something between disbelief and frustration. Your Honor, with respect, we're entertaining a packet submitted by maintenance staff. This is already beyond... Judge Marrow raised a hand, silencing him instantly. I'm aware of his position in this courthouse, she said calmly. I'm also aware that truth doesn't require rank. Cassian's jaw tightened. The judge turned to me. Your diagrams indicate deliberate pressure applied to the child's neck. Please walk me through your angle analysis. I opened my folder and stepped closer, placing Kellen's charts on her desk. This is the mapped pattern of the bruise, consistent downward torque, not a catch, not a snag. The child's height prevents this angle from occurring accidentally. Judge Marrow leaned forward, studying the diagram closely. This foot placement, she asked, pointing at a recreated outline. Matches the scratch marks left in the carpet, I said. They were made while she resisted being pulled down. And the residue? Transferred makeup from an adult's hands onto a different costume collar. Same shade I saw on Mrs. Hargrave. Elira stepped forward. Your Honor, I submitted my affidavit as well. I witnessed Mrs. Hargrave isolate the child behind the curtain. There were multiple volunteers available. She insisted on taking her alone. Cassian finally snapped. This is outrageous. You're allowing baseless theories to... Enough, Mr. Hargrave, Judge Marrow said, voice colder than anything I'd heard in that building. Your wife was involved in an incident. There is evidence suggesting it was not accidental. I will examine this thoroughly. Cassian stepped forward. Helena, you will address me as Your Honor, she corrected sharply. For a moment, the room absorbed the weight of that boundary. Cassian swallowed, recalibrating. It was the first time I'd ever seen him off balance. Judge Marrow turned her attention back to me. Your analysis is highly detailed, more so than I'd expect from someone in your role. My heart didn't skip. My voice didn't shake. It's from my former profession, I said. I was a military forensic pattern analyst. The impact hit the room like a stone shattering glass. Cassian stiffened visibly. Elira looked relieved, finally understanding why I moved with such precision. The judge didn't look surprised. She nodded once, as if a puzzle piece had finally clicked. That explains your reconstruction, she said. It explains why the accident didn't match spontaneous injury patterns, I replied. The judge folded her hands. Given the sum of this evidence combined with the affidavit and physical markers, I am compelled to advance this to a full evidentiary hearing. The matter will no longer remain internal. Cassian stepped forward again. Your Honor, this isn't just a hearing about a child's costume malfunction. This is an attempt to defame my family. Judge Marrow's gaze sliced through him. Your wife is implicated in deliberate harm. He shook his head, anger edging into desperation. She is unstable right now. The stress doesn't explain precision, the judge cut in, nor does it excuse it. He opened his mouth again, but this time, Lisa stepped forward with a sealed envelope. Your Honor, the chain of custody logs Mr. Veller submitted. There's more. Cassian's face paled. He hadn't known about those. The judge accepted the envelope, skimmed the first page, and nodded decisively. This packet is substantial. This cannot be dismissed or buried. I'll schedule a formal hearing. All relevant parties will be subpoenaed. Finally, public exposure was no longer hypothetical. It was happening. Cassian tried one last angle, leaning in slightly. Helena, think carefully. This will reflect on the entire courthouse, on your docket, on the system. Judge Marrow stood. This is not about reputation, she said. It's about a child. Her words filled the room with something undeniable, something final. Cassian had no response. For the first time since the night in the auditorium, he didn't have control. She looked at me. Mr. Veller, prepare your exhibits and expect contact from my office. This process moves swiftly starting now. I understand, I said. And Mr. Hargrave, she added, turning toward him, your involvement in obstructing this incident will also be examined. Cassian's expression collapsed into something raw, fear dressed as rage. The judge dismissed us. As I stepped out of the chambers, Elira touched my arm lightly. This is it, she whispered. You just broke him. No, I said, watching the DA stumble out behind us. His own lies broke him. I just held up the mirror. And now the whole courthouse would be forced to look. Cassian stalked down the hallway behind us, but for the first time since this started, his steps weren't confident. They were frantic. The thin veneer he always wore, the polished arrogance, the perfectly controlled posture, all of it had cracked. I didn't slow down, neither did Elira. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed steadily, as if the courthouse itself was waiting for what came next. When we reached the end of the corridor, Cassian finally caught up. "Don't walk away from me," he hissed. I turned slightly. "I'm not walking away. I'm walking forward." His eyes burned with a dangerous mix of panic and fury. "You think this hearing will go your way? You think my wife, my family, will just let you smear them and walk off untouched?" Elira stepped forward before I could answer. "Your wife harmed a child, and you tried to bury it." His focus snapped to her. "You're finished, both of you. This whole stunt, Cassian." My voice was calm, too calm for the moment, which only seemed to unsettle him more. "This isn't about stunts. It's about what she did to my daughter." "She passed out," he shouted. "Children pass out all the time." Elira's voice sharpened. "Children don't get deliberate pressure marks on their necks all the time." For half a second, Cassian faltered. Then he masked it with a sneer. "You're both nothing, maintenance staff and a clerk. You don't get to dismantle my life." "You dismantled it yourself," I said quietly. A cold silence followed until he finally stormed away, leaving his fading rage echoing behind him. Elira exhaled shakily. "He's unraveling." "That means the truth is working," I replied. We walked toward the stairs together, but she stopped at the landing. "I need to go prepare the clerk's packet for the subpoena notices." Then she hesitated. "Rowan, today's review was only the beginning. The hearing will be brutal." "I know, and he will throw everything at you." "I know that too." She studied my face, searching for fear, maybe expecting it. Instead, she found resolve. "All right," she said finally. "I'll see you tomorrow." I nodded and headed down the stairs alone. Outside, the sky had darkened. Thick clouds pressed low, heavy with the kind of storm that didn't arrive quietly. I walked to my car and checked my phone. One missed call from an unknown number. I didn't return it. Instead, I drove straight to the apartment. When I opened the door, Mira ran toward me, Fox clutched tightly in her hands. "Dad!" I knelt and scooped her up gently, careful of her neck. "I'm here." She pulled back, looking at me with wide eyes. "Did you fix it?" I swallowed. "I'm working on it." "Is she in trouble?" she whispered, as if the walls could hear her. "She will be," I said. "But you're safe." She seemed relieved, but her small fingers tightened around the fox. That stuffed animal had become something more, a symbol of every moment she'd needed comfort and couldn't find it anywhere else. And now, seeing her clutch, it felt like watching innocence defend itself. After settling her in with a movie, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out my files again. Tomorrow would bring subpoenas, statements, pressures Cassian couldn't erase. But the hearing itself would require something more: clarity, precision. I needed to piece together one final timeline reconstruction, something that would speak even louder than my testimony. I was deep into reviewing the notes when a new message popped up on my phone, from an unsaved number, but one I recognized instantly. "We need to talk." McSai stared at the text for a long moment before typing back. "Where?" His reply came seconds later. "Parking deck, 20 minutes. I closed the laptop, kissed Mira's forehead, told Mrs. Alden I'd be right back, and left the apartment. The parking deck was dim, echoing faintly with distant cars. Mock stood near a pillar, hands shoved into his pockets, head low. When he looked up, something in him had changed. The hostility wasn't as sharp, the walls weren't as high. "You're in deeper than you think," he said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." He paced once, shaking his head. "I didn't sign up for this. Covering up some petty courthouse politics? Fine. Looking the other way on budget nonsense? Fine. But this is a child." His voice wavered. That was new. "You know what she did," I said. He didn't deny it. "You know what he's trying to hide," I added. Still no denial. Mock stared at the concrete beneath his feet. "I saw the scratches on the curtain pole. I saw the carpet marks. When they told me to ignore it, I did. But after today..." He trailed off, then looked at me directly. "Your daughter didn't just pass out. She fought. The words struck deeper than he realized. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because tomorrow," he said, stepping closer. "He's going to try something big. He's desperate. And desperate men don't stay predictable. You need to be ready." I nodded slowly. "I am." He shook his head. "You think you are, but you don't know how far he'll go." "I know enough," I replied. A long silence stretched before he spoke again. "I can't testify," he said, "but I can get you something else." "What?" "A recording." My chest tightened. "Of what?" "Of Celine, before the incident. Something you'll want for the hearing." This was it, the break that would turn the courtroom into a battlefield Cassian couldn't control. "When can you get it?" I asked. "Tonight." A long breath left me. "Then bring it to me." He hesitated. "You sure you're ready for what's on it?" "Yes." He nodded once, gripped by something like guilt. "Then this ends tomorrow." As I drove home, the storm finally broke above the city. Thunder rolled through the sky, loud enough to shake the glass. It felt like a warning, or a promise. By the time I reached the apartment, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm, rain hammering against the windows, wind pushing against the building like a warning. Mira was asleep, curled up on the couch with the fox tucked beneath her chin. Mrs. Alden gave me a quiet nod before slipping out the door. I stood there for a moment, watching my daughter breathe, letting that sight anchor everything inside me, because tomorrow wouldn't be a hearing, it would be a reckoning. Near midnight, a soft knock tapped against my door. 3 taps, a pause, 2 more. Not random, a deliberate signal. I opened the door, and Mox stepped. Inside quickly, hood soaked, expression tight. He held a small external drive in his hand, wrapped in cloth like something fragile. "This is everything," he said. "I'm not staying long." "What's on it?" His jaw flexed. "You'll hear." I guided him to the kitchen table. He didn't sit. He hovered, restless, guilt-ridden. I plugged the drive into my laptop, opened the single encrypted file, and hit play. Celine's voice came first, breathy, irritated, recorded on some small device, probably Mox's vest mic. "I'm telling you, Cassian, she needs to learn boundaries. That child struts around like she's untouchable. Someone had to put her in her place." My stomach tightened. Cassian's voice followed, low and clipped. "Not like that. You can't leave marks. Do you know what happens if she talks?" "She won't," Celine snapped. "Kids are dramatic. She'll faint or cry, and everyone will think it's nerves." There was a beat of silence, long enough that I felt Mox shift uncomfortably beside me. Then Cassian, "Fine, but keep it subtle." Celine, laughing, "Please, I know exactly how much pressure a zipper needs before it leaves a line." The file ended. The room felt colder than the rain outside. Mox exhaled shakily. "Now you know why I'm helping." I closed the laptop. This alone could convict both of them. "I know," he said, "but understand something. After tomorrow, they'll come after whoever handed you that drive." "You don't have to do more," I said. He shook his head. "Already did it. Good luck, Rowan." He left as quietly as he arrived. I sat there for a long time, letting the weight of that recording settle into my bones. Every instinct honed in war zones and tribunals told me the same thing. This was the keystone, the one piece that turned suspicion into certainty, theory into truth, investigation into justice. And I was done being quiet. Morning arrived with a cold bite in the air. I dressed in clean, simple clothes, nothing dramatic, nothing designed for spectacle. This wasn't about image, it was about truth. Mira hugged me tightly before I left, her fox pressed against her cheek. "Come back soon," she whispered. "I will," I promised. The courthouse was buzzing when I arrived. Reporters gathered at the steps, security stood outside the entrance. Attorneys whispered urgently in clusters. Whatever Judge Marrow had put on the docket for today, the world knew it wasn't ordinary. Inside, the tension thickened. The moment I stepped into the hearing room, Cassian shot me a look sharp enough to cut glass. Celine wasn't beside him. She'd been kept out pending review. That alone told me how seriously Judge Marrow was taking this. Lisa motioned to me from the front. "Sit here," she whispered. "Your exhibits will be called early." I nodded and took my seat. Judge Marrow entered moments later, and the room rose. When we sat again, she began, without preamble. "This hearing concerns allegations of deliberate harm inflicted upon a minor, Evidence submitted warrants immediate examination. We will begin with the preliminary exhibits. Cassian stood sharply. Your Honor, before we proceed, you may sit, she said, not looking at him. The room froze. I stepped forward when my name was called. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't shake. I moved like the man I used to be. Methodical, precise, unafraid. I presented the diagrams, the photographs, the trajectory maps, Kellen's reconstructed model. Then I placed the external drive on the evidence table. Your Honor, this is an audio file provided by a courthouse investigator. Chain of custody is verified. Cassian bolted upright. Objection, this is fabricated. Sit down, Mr. Hargrave, Judge Marrow commanded. He didn't. Two bailiffs approached. Only then did he sit. The judge pressed play. Celine's voice filled the room. Her confession, her intent, her calculation, Cassian's complicity. Silence followed, thick, horrified, undeniable. Judge Marrow closed the file. Given this evidence, I am ordering immediate suspension of Mrs. Hargrave from all courthouse activities pending criminal charges. Mr. Hargrave, your attempt to suppress material evidence will be forwarded to the Ethics Board and State Prosecutor. Cassian looked at me then, truly looked, and in his eyes, for the first time, there was no power, only collapse. The judge continued, Mr. Veller, thank you for your thorough reconstruction. Your actions protected not only your child, but the integrity of this institution. I nodded once. I did what any father would. The gavel struck. It was over, or rather, it had begun. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sky had cleared, soft sunlight cutting through the retreating storm clouds. I called Mrs. Alden, told her I was on my way. Mira's voice came through the phone, small, hopeful. Is everything fixed now? Not everything, I said softly, but enough. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, I paused and looked back at the towering building. For years, I'd worked behind its walls unnoticed, unseen. Today, the same walls carried my voice for everyone to hear, not because I wanted recognition, but because truth deserved volume, and my daughter deserved protection, always. Subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?